She could speak with wisdom, argue with reason, write poetry or scripture, but none of it mattered if her body wasn't pure. In medieval Europe, a woman's worth was measured not by her mind, but by her chastity, virginity before marriage, obedience. After rumors could ruin her, a whisper could seal her fate. Testimonies in court ignored confessions under torture, suspect unless she fit the image of virtue. Even queens weren't safe from the obsession. This is the story of how female identity was chained to the body and how centuries of silence weren't born from ignorance, but from being deliberately unheard. In medieval times, purity wasn't protection, it was control. Step into a world where a woman's most prized possession had little to do with her intellect or kindness, but revolved around a fragile notion, her purity. It's a tumultuous landscape of medieval life, where superstition intertwined with survival, a woman's worth was finally measured against her chastity. In this era, virtue was not merely a personal quality, but a shield against the relentless scrutiny of society. In medieval society, a woman's virginity wasn't just a private affair, but a public testament to her family's honor and her future prospects. Her value in marriage, her position within her community, and even her family standing could pivot on this singular aspect. Often seen as a mystical state, virginity was closely associated with a woman's moral integrity and familial loyalty, serving as a beacon of pride for her kin. Yet, should her purity be questioned, even the softest whispers could sow the seeds of disgrace. The societal pressure to maintain virginity before marriage was immense. It wasn't simply a personal choice, but a collective judgment, an unspoken rule that prized a woman's untainted status as a commodity. Her untouched body was likened to a precious vessel, her silence and demurance entangled with her worth, overshadowing her intelligence or wit. Women carried this heavy mantle of chastity, not just for personal virtue, but as guardians of familial and social prestige. Medieval marriages were more than intimate unions. They were contracts steeped in assurances of a woman's purity. The bride's chasteness dictated the worth of her dowry and the success of the matrimonial bond, forming a currency that could be celebrated or scorned. A virgin bride upheld an ideal intertwining her marital worth with her perceived purity. Failure to meet this ideal could threaten alliances and anal marriages. In this framework, the threat of tainted purity loomed large. A bride who failed to prove her purity faced personal disgrace and potential financial collapse with blood-stained sheets after the wedding, signifying integrity absurdly tied to honor. Within this communal judgment, a woman's reputation was her fragile shield. Virginity was an outspoken declaration of virtue, defining her societal place. To possess this trait was to anticipate fruitful marriages and bountiful dowries, secured by trust in untarnished virtue. But this reputation was brittle. Whispers could become doubts, leading to stories that altered lives irreversibly. Accusations could tear apart a reputation born for a lifetime with virgins scrutinized, their silence often misread as guilt. Economic mechanics of dowries further emphasized how virginity was quantified. Marriage was linked to wealth and power with a woman's dowry, acting as an economic transaction bolstered by her virgin status. The dowry represented faith in her to uphold familial values, a promise akin to a certification of purity. False purity accusations post-marriage threatened economic disaster, turning dowries into tools of public denouncement. Women were confined within marriages where their value was transactional. Legal structures mirrored these societal norms, holding a woman's chastity as both a shield and a prison. Court cases placed women at the mercy of male voices, their testimonies disregarded unless backed by a virtuous reputation. In contest over virginity, a woman's word meant little without male corroboration, showcasing a legal system where chastity overshadowed truth. Such accusations derailed women's lives with honor held precariously between communal belief and personal reality. Folklore and chronicles from the time illustrate purity's central role in society, with tales of women's honor intertwined with legends. In these stories, a woman's virtue becomes pivotal. Her purity, the core on which narratives pivot. These tales served as moral lessons and cautionary notes, and some accounts depicted redemption through miraculous proofs. Such rare stories highlighted women's victories within a strict value system. Noble women were not spared these expectations, with virginity tied to dynastic ambition and familial alliances, aligning power through alliances sealed in purity. They were stalwarts of honor, their virginity a symbol scrutinized by rank and power's social stakes. Yet noble women faced ruin from impropriety. In their gilded cages they were compelled into strategic marriages, walking a line between family honor and personal autonomy. In a society where virginity was visual proof of worth, the guardianship of this trait was relentless. One's actions, interactions, even conversations were laden with meaning, either reinforcing or undermining purity. Women lived under constant watch, with family and community perpetuating a vigilance that saw women as guardians of moral order. Observing purity was a communal insistence, with women under a perpetual trial of virtue. The Church's influence steeped purity as a divine edict. Virginity was a sacrament, transforming women into exemplars or outcasts within ecclesial hierarchies. Piety and purity forged a narrative venerating chastity, echoed through confessions, penance, and teachings that shaped societal norms. Women's bodies became altars of purity or shame, largely defined by ecclesial standards. Even in religious service, nuns reinforced this spiritual framework. Exploring these medieval layers uncovers how deeply embedded purity was in cultural fabric. Narrative surreal and resonant with echoes of shared cultural histories, it's a tale woven from societal norms, economic status, and power that extended beyond intimate spaces. Not merely a relic. This history is a timeless testimony of power uses and abuses where women and their voices were extensions of others' narratives. In medieval times, the courtroom was often a stage where women found their voices diminished to mere whispers against a legal backdrop dominated by men. This was a world where the very structure of the law, shaped largely by male perspectives, often defined women as unreliable witnesses. Court documents and legal treatises from the period shed stark light on this bias, portraying women as inherently more deceitful and emotionally driven than men. The prevailing view considered women's words suspect unless buttressed by a male witness or an unimpeachable character. Such was the nature of things, where an accusation made by a woman was often seen as an echo of truth, merely echoing off the walls of a courtroom dominated by male skepticism. This pervasive gender bias bred a system designed to ignore women's stories, leaving many trapped within its unjust confines. Rape cases illustrated this reality most brutally. Women needed to demonstrate beyond doubt that they resisted their attackers. It wasn't enough to simply be a victim. Evidence of physical injuries, the presence of male witnesses, and immediate outcry were paramount. The law oftentimes transferred the burden of proof onto the shoulders of the victim as society questioned their behavior, dress, or past actions. For many women, it meant double victimization. First through the crime itself, and then through the punishing skepticism of the judicial system. A woman's reputation served as a crucial ticket to legal acknowledgement. But even slight stains on her character could obliterate her chances of receiving justice. The stakes were incredibly high, encompassing a woman's future, her family's honor, and her social standing, all hinging on this precarious balance of moral sanctity. Central to these court proceedings was the pillar of the male witness. Very often, male voices were deemed necessary to lend credibility to a woman's testimony. This need for a male endorsement to validate a woman's claim was not just a legal formality, but reflected a deep societal norm. Male friends or relatives could either affirm a woman's truth or unravel it. In many instances, even when male support was present, it couldn't guarantee an impartial hearing, as deeply sown biases and preconceptions continued to cloud judgment. It was less about justice and more about how men interpreted a woman's words, which often solidified the systemic sexism prevalent in these times. Further aggravating this imbalance was the cultural construct of female frailty, which painted women as weak both morally and intellectually. Literature, religious texts, and folklore from the period often fueled this stereotype, or schema, presenting women as creatures guided by emotion rather than reason, susceptible to deception and sin. This portrayal provided convenient justification for dismissing women's testimony as unreliable, maintaining male dominance in the courtroom. The myth of female frailty thereby became a crucial barrier in medieval legal culture, now muting women's voices and fortifying the overarching power of male narratives. Parallel to these challenges were issues of slander and defamation, where a woman's reputation was both her armor and her Achilles heel. False allegations could devastate a woman's social standing, limiting marriage prospects and tarnishing family honor. The courtroom became an arena fraught with treachery, for women seeking justice against slander. Burdened with proving their innocence, women often needed to demonstrate an unimpeachable character, steep price to pay, particularly when the judicial scales were already tilted against them. The systemic negligence of women's reputations in these cases led many to suffer in silence, accepting injustice rather than risking further harm to their social status. A woman's reputation held considerable sway in courtroom verdicts. Name might offer some leverage, but any scandal shadowed her credibility severely. Courts focused intensively on a woman's character, examining her piety, chastity, and obedience, using these as measures for her honesty rather than weighing her statements. This approach laid bare the gender biases within medieval judiciary. Proceedings where the presumption of virtue overshadowed factual evidence. The laws themselves bore testament to gender inequalities. Women often required male guardians to represent them, and legal language of the era was imbued with a paternalistic view that saw women as needing male stewardship in legal matters. Punishments varied significantly, with women facing harsher consequences for perceived moral violations compared to men, consequence of laws that institutionalized gender disparities, maintaining a societal order that kept women's voices at the margins. The interplay between rural and urban settings further complicated women's legal experiences. In smaller, tight-knit rural communities, personal relationships and rumors played critical roles in shaping perceptions of justice. Gossip often doubled as testimony in villages, while in urban environments, a woman's word might hold even less weight amid the anonymity. Cities presented both opportunity and obstacle, with formal legal structures offering some pathways toward redress, albeit through impersonal procedures, often overshadowed by bureaucratic detachment. Historical cases like those of Joan of Arc and Alice Catulla underscore the struggle of women to have their voices heard and respected in the courtroom. Joan's trial, marred by her dismissive treatment, reflected the broader narrative women faced when challenging male authority. Similarly, Alice Kittler's witchcraft accusations reveal how easily a woman's reputation could be weaponized. Where personal vendettas intertwined with legal persecution, the legacy of these silenced voices echoes through time, influencing modern legal perceptions and societal attitudes. This historical neglect lingers today, begging reflection upon our understanding of credibility and justice. Where the medieval past overlooked women's voices, contemporary societies face a challenge: to create spaces that value every word, ensuring these whispers of history become voices no longer marginalized, but integral to justice. In medieval society, a woman's reputation was a delicate heirloom, passed down like a prized but fragile possession through generations. It was a burden, almost a curse, bestowed upon women whose worth was often judged by the purity of their ancestors, rather than their own merits. Family honor was tightly bound to the perceived virtue of women in the lineage, making any transgression by a female ancestor, real or rumored, a stain that could mar the prospects of her descendants. One can imagine the anxiety that must have shadowed these women, knowing their fate was tied to whispers from the past rather than their conduct in the present. In a world where news traveled swiftly via word of mouth, gossip was as potent as wildfire, consuming personal achievements and identities. For women born into families tainted by rumors of scandal, their existence became a cycle of prejudice and alienation. The concept that virtue was imbibed and defining like blood meant escaping this shadow was nearly impossible. Even drastic acts, such as beneficial marriages or relocating, offered little security. For the stench of dishonor often lingered, following like an unseen specter. This bleak connection between identity and familial purity was the silent architect molding their lives. A relentless force that guided their every step. Gossip, with its treacherous power, wielded more influence than any court decree silently, dictating the paths of many lives. Unlike modern courts of law, where evidence and testimony shape destinies, medieval reputations could be demolished by mere murmurs. These whispers needed no proof or witnesses, yet they could alter the trajectory of a woman's life in a blink. In those tight-knit villages and bustling towns, privacy was a luxury many could ill afford. Misunderstandings, jealousy, or unrelated disputes could spark a rumor, branding a woman with a scarlet letter from which recovery was arduous, if not impossible. This fragility formed a moral currency within the community's economy. A currency more volatile than any market stocks, reputation was a family's most valuable asset, strengthened communal bonds and facilitated alliances. Daughters and mothers were appraised in this market by their perceived purity, shaping their futures as if their virtue was merchandise to be traded. It was an environment that demanded women adhere to constricting norms, sacrificing personal freedom for the collective economic good. The irony ran deep. In securing a family stability, many women forfeited their own autonomy, illustrating the cruel paradox